Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the Kane audio vlog. Today's going to be the beginning of a little mini series I'm going to record for you. I'm literally just sort of filming this as I do the job, so it's going to be probably cut up into 3, 4, 5 parts, and it's focusing on the Mixdown. I get asked a lot about, tips and tricks for mix engineering and mixing tracks. And a lot of people sort of have asked me on the YouTube channel as well to maybe go through some mixing. So I've sort of not done that yet because either I haven't finished a track or I've not wanted to be showing clients work or whatever. So I mentioned something about mixing in my last video, and a mate of mine, Enzo Bennett, who's also a mousetrap artist, said, do one of mine, show it on video. So I said, hell yeah, let's do it. I haven't even heard the track yet, but I know it's something he's finished and he wants it mixed, so we're just going to walk through. I'm going to film it all, and hopefully some of this will be usable. I know his tracks are pretty solid, so there's probably not going to be any drastic mistakes in there. But hopefully by you guys watching me go through the process, you'll sort of pick up a few bits and pieces, hopefully. So, starting at the start, the first thing I've done just before I hit record was open up the folder and just check the settings of the WAV files. So I always request them to be at least 24-bit, 48K WAV, and I want each stem peaking at no higher than 10 dB. The reason for that will become clearer later on, but it's basically so I've got enough headroom to play, and I can crank something up much louder than anything else without having to worry about losing the dynamics. What I will say is that I do all of my mixing in Pro Tools usually. There's no specific reason that I choose Pro Tools other than it's just another DAW that I know and use, and I know it's pretty rock solid when it comes to the basics like that. And something I've always done myself is, even though I write and produce in Bitwig or Ableton or whatever, I always export the stems. If I'm going to really focus on the mix of a track, I'll export the stems as audio and then import them to Pro Tools. But I sort of recommend to other people, if you only know, say, Ableton, for example, then, export the stems as audio and then just bring them back in to Ableton and then do your mix. And the reason I've always done that, and I recommend it to other people, is you kind of need to treat the production job totally separately to the Mixdown. And I know when I was getting into production and I was working on my mixes, you'd spot something that you thought, I'm not so keen on that bass line or that note or whatever, something to do with the musicality of the track, and then you'd end up fiddling with that, and then you'd lose focus on the actual mix. You'd forget that you're actually supposed to be focusing on the mix levels, and it all starts getting a bit messy. So I always recommend to people, treat them as totally separate jobs, and the reason you do that is because you need to reach a point in your production. At some stage you're going to go, right, this track is done, this is finished, and it's at that point and not a minute sooner should you start looking at the Mixdown. I know that we all sort of, especially me, I sort of mix as I go, but I'll always then take a moment, export, import it back in as audio and go, right, I'm no longer listening to the musicality of it, I'm no longer focusing on the sound design, I'm purely looking at this or listening to this objectively and scientifically, thinking about amplitudes, frequencies and various other bits and pieces that we'll go through. So that's probably my first tip. Enzo here has sent me the tracks. They're 32-bit floats, which is fine, they're huge, which gives us lots of headroom in amplitude. The sample rate, I've noticed he's put at 44.1, not a major ball ache, but I prefer 48k just because you've just got that extra bit of play for when it comes to filtering things. The sample rate isn't going to interfere too much. So yeah, so like I say, I'm going to go through this with you guys. There will be points where I'm probably cutting the video out a bit, and you'll obviously spot the obvious cuts. I'm just going to straight cut, because there's going to be a few sessions where I'm probably just listening to the track throughout, but I'm going to try and film it all and screen record the whole thing, because I know that during some of the listening sessions I'll just tweak things here and there, and I might just, I might have 3 or 4 things on my mind at any given point that I need to do, so I might not be telling you what I'm doing, but hopefully in the edit that'll kind of come across. So yeah, on with the job. Like I say, it'll be a few videos. I'll put out hopefully one a week if I can, and that's hopefully going to be on top of my normal vlog videos. So yeah, welcome to the little mini series, and let's get started. So first things first, I'm loading up a new template, and this is a template that I use for my own productions because I know Enzo's work relatively well. I know that his tracks will fit into my own template folder that I have, and this is what my template folder looks like. So when I drop a pre-master track in here, this is the internal mix. I've got a digital monitor, I think it's just off camera, yeah, so next rack across that's off the edge of the camera over there is the digital spectrum analyzer, and then if I want to send it to an external rack and any of those racks over there, then I can send a feed out, and I've got an external chain, pre-master and then master, and on my master I have a bunch of deactivated plugins. I will get to those at the end of this mini series, but by all means pause the video and have a look and see what I've got there. So these are just my default go-to kind of master chain for my own tracks, really. Each track should be treated slightly differently, even if they're your own, and I know my own mistakes and my own flaws and where I tend to maybe undercompensate or overcompensate for certain things, so I tend to have them stuck on that, and I use that as my sort of starting point for other people's mixes or masters, because my goal for me is to make someone else's track mixed to the specification that I would mix my own music. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. So first thing I'm going to do is import audio, and I'm looking for Enzo's file there, and I can just highlight the lot, copy them in so it's non-destructive, and yeah, that's great. And that'll take a while processing because it's Pro Tools and it's slow as fuck. So while that's processing, it's probably worth me mentioning another element that I'll be doing. So what I do is I have, with those channels I've just shown you, I have a couple of little buses set up so that I can, I think it's bus 1, 2 that my pre-master channel reads from, which is an internal bus. So what I tend to do is first load up all these stems, and then I'll set them to go to bus 1 and 2, and I'll also group them as a mix, because then I can bring down the levels to minus 10 dB or whatever it is that I think is most suitable at that point, because I want the channels to be sort of peaking at minus 10 dB, so that the level that goes into my pre-master chain isn't going to be running too hot. And one of the other reasons for hitting minus 10 dB, I should really be aiming for minus 15, but I aim for minus 10, and I can bring it down from there, is because if I'm bussing stuff out to external analog gear, minus 10 dB in digital world is a pretty hot signal for the analog world. So that's one of the many reasons of why I sort of suggest minus 10 dB, because if they're all sort of sat around there, I know that it'll be peaking through the master chain if it's going through an analog box of any kind. It'll be quite a hot signal. Right, so that's imported, and import as new track. So while those audio channels are still highlighted, I'll Apple G and call it mix, and that means I've got a group set down here which is called mix, and that means when I go to the mixer I can bring the faders down and it'll bring the whole mix down at the same time. The other thing I'll do is, while those channels are highlighted, you can see that the inputs are set to in 1, 2, so I'll give them no input because they're all audio stems, and I'll set the outputs to bus 1, 2 like I mentioned earlier on. And now you can see over here this pre-master chain reads from bus 1, 2, and the reason I do that is because that has my initial EQ and a compressor, and this compressor I can't pronounce, but it's a lovely sounding compressor, and it's just on a really gentle setting. You'll see in a moment when I load things up and when it starts playing, you know, I get probably half a dB gain reduction in there. It's just there just to sort of catch the odd peak or whatever. It's not actually doing any work. Right, so here we can quite clearly see it's the kicks. Another thing I'll say is a big shout out to Enzo for labelling his stems. You'd be surprised the amount of stems I get through that just say channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, and I'm hearing the track for the first time going, oh, that vocal needs some work, where is it, you know. So yeah, props to Enzo for labelling them nicely. Makes my life a lot easier. So I can see the kicks are over there, so I'm going to bring the volume down here. In fact, that's not going to affect your volume, is it? Right, I've highlighted the mix channel here, so let's bring it right down, because I'm playing it for the first time. I don't know how loud it's going to be, so I don't want to kill you if you're on headphones. Right, that's all good. So we can set them back up to 0. So Enzo's obviously listened and has set them at sort of give or take minus 10 dB, so that's fine. So the first thing I'm going to do, now I've routed them all up, got them into my mixer, everything's looking good, I'll set my mixer to a narrow view, and what I'll be looking for, so you can see I've already highlighted the kicks down here. What I'm going to do, first thing I always do, is bring the kicks over here so that they're the first channel. And the reason being is that the kick drum in dance music, that is, the kick drum is probably the most fundamental part to a track. If you get that bit wrong, the rest of the track almost becomes insignificant. So especially in terms of loudness, that's the one thing that's always going to poke through, whether that be in a good way or a bad way, it's going to poke through, and that's going to be the one thing that stands out. So I tend to start with the kicks, and then the next thing I'll look for is the bass, and quite often I'll solo the kicks and the bass so that they just play together, and I can sort of sit there going, right, do these sit comfortably around each other? And so in this case, let's have a little find of the bass line. There we go, I can see bass there, so let's solo that, and I'll solo the kicks as well. Just quickly skim over to see the names of these other things. Again, if you're working on your own Mixdown, you're going to know all of these bits anyway, but I'm seeing this for the first time. So right, so there is only one kicks and one bass, which is great for me. So you can see they're together now, next to each other, and we'll just play these on their own. You can see they both come in around there. okay, that's not too bad. I can hear the bass probably needs a little bit more low end. The other thing I'm going to say right now, because I think I'm going to probably bring part 1 of this video to a close soon, because I think that's just the starting point, is the kicks and the bass, the loading the files, treating things as separates. But one thing I will say is through this mini-series, I normally mix my music at about 85 to 90 dB in this room, which is, you know, pretty loud. It's a you know, a fairly loud signal, not crazy loud, but louder than I normally have this camera equipment and whatever recording at. So I'm going to apologize in advance. Sometimes the audio might get a bit tricky for me, and you'll probably hear you can probably hear a little bit of background hiss or whatever. Now that's going to suddenly disappear at times because I'm probably muting in the edit. I'll mute the microphone of this camera, just so that you can hear this audio, because my speakers are going to be blaringly loud for the video microphone. So I just want to sort of apologize in advance if that's the case. If you start hearing dips and crackles or whatever, then it's probably something I've done in the edit, because at the end of the day, I'm a music producer and mix engineer, not a video editor or whatever the fuck ever. So you get what you're given, is what I'm saying. Right, so starting with the kicks and the bass. The kicks. They're fine. You can see they're peaking at pretty much minus 10 dB. That's exactly what I wanted. The bass. Actually, when it's cranked up, it's not too bad, although I'll probably lift that a dB or 2, I reckon. Let's knock it up by, say, 2 dB. And the first thing I'm noticing in that bass is, because it's a short stabby kick and a short stabby bass, which is fine, that's obviously what Enzo's gone for. You know, he obviously wants that 8th note, you know, and you can tell because of the rhythm of the bass. And I know I did a video recently on mixing kicks and bass, and if you didn't check that out already, then go for it. And I always sort of suggested, if you're going for a long extended kick drum, then you can have a short stabby bass, and vice versa. He's going for this robotic, hypnotic 8th note thing. So with that rhythm, I know they both want to be quite short and stabby. So what I would say is, instantly my first thought would be to add a transient designer, which I think is transient master on this. It's transient designer on Bitwig, I think. And I'll probably lift the attack. So where I've just raised it 2 dB, I might actually go back on that in a second and just raise the attack of that bass note, because that's going to give it that clicking stab immediately. So let's have a little play with that and see what we can do. That's really not doing much. I think the reason for that is because actually what I wasn't hearing is there's some sort of underlying sub in there as well. So let's just play with this. Yeah, there we go. So when I shorten the sustain, you can hear the note gets shorter. But actually I think that's not really what I wanted. I didn't want to make it shorter, I just wanted to give it a little transient attack. So I'm not going to remove that, I'm just going to leave it there but bypass it for now, because I have a feeling once everything starts coming in together later on in the track, I have a feeling we're going to come back to that bass line. I think we're either going to give it a little bit more low end, or perhaps we might actually high shelf it and give it some transient attacks, but it depends on what the rest of the track sounds like. So I'm not going to go straight into that, but I'm just going to have a very brief listen so we can see what we've got coming up. Okay, and then breakdown, I assume. Oh, there's some nice synths there. And okay, this is going to be a great project already. I'm excited about this. So I'm going to wrap up this video there. I can see on the camera I'm at, what, 22 minutes? Shit, sorry guys. So this is probably your Sunday afternoon gone. Yeah, so okay, like I say, just to wrap up, as you can see, I'm going to carry on filming a lot of this anyway. I'm going to save that project right there. And like I say, I'm going to break it up into mini sections, because otherwise you're going to end up with like a 6-hour video, and that's not going to be fun for anyone. So let's wrap it up there. I'll probably stop the filming now as well, and leave it there myself and come back tomorrow, because I've got other jobs I need to do. But hopefully that's at least given you an idea of where I start my mixdown and what I think about in a mixdown, and hopefully in the next video we're going to start getting into the nitty-gritty. So obviously we're going to go through the basic levels of making sure things fit, but also questioning why does something or does something not fit, and then we'll get into things like EQing things, whether that be additive or subtractive EQing techniques, and what to EQ, why, when and where, and then you'll go into other things like compression, bussing, routing and groupings, and then you end up moving towards the pre-master stage, and then I'll probably sort of whiz over the master stage as well, just to get a good idea of what it's going to sound like as a finished piece. But this is about mixdown, not mastering, remember. So yeah, I hope you guys have liked what you've seen so far. I'm going to cut this before it goes to 25 minutes in length. That's ridiculous. So I'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.